So good evening everybody. Thank you very much for joining in. This side Rahul Magan here, and today we are going to cover a very interesting and little complicated topic, which is foreign exchange valuation adjustment. As you very well understand that foreign exchange market is getting a lot of volatility and accounting standards are getting revised, especially IFRS 9. And in this accounting standard, we need to understand one fact very clearly, that valuation adjustments will come into play, and especially after Basel 3 there is a lot of emphasis which has been given to the valuation adjustment. Lot of emphasis. Now what do you mean by a valuation adjustment? A valuation adjustment is very important. Now what is that? Rather than giving you theoretical definition, let me give you a practical definition of a valuation adjustment. I think in the last year, one major global investment bank reported a loss of approximately $1.5 billion due to funding valuation adjustment, also known as FVA. This has apparently joined CVA and DVA. This has apparently joined the expanding list of CVA and DVA. CVA stands for credit valuation adjustment and DVA stands for debit value adjustment. Now what do you mean by valuation adjustment? Valuation adjustment refer to the adjustments which you need to pass through in your as regards your derivative books are concerned, and you need to take this in your P&L. P&L stands for your earnings. Now please be sincerely honest that valuation adjustment will pass through your earnings and it will impact your earnings. So take it very seriously. Very seriously. Valuation adjustment is not something which you will take at the granted, right? Now as regard the valuation adjustments are concerned, the following are the valuation, or following is the most common hierarchy of the valuation adjustment. May or might not be the complete hierarchy, to be very honest. One is CVA, credit valuation adjustment, that incorporated in 2002. And then another comes DVA, debit valuation adjustment, which was another 2003 types. Then comes FVA. Don't worry, I'm going to explain everything, not in detail, because we are coming up with a separate video which would cover the valuation, which would cover debit adjustment valuation. But yes, we will describe them slightly. And also we are coming up with a video on our YouTube channel wherein we would be discussing in two parts wrong way risk. This is very important to cover wrong way risk. One is funding valuation adjustment, that went in 2011. Another come COLVA and OIS, which is cost of collateralized derivatives, that went in 2010. And very important that consider into consideration, which is KVA, cost of regulatory capital, that went in 2015 plus. You know that how Doshi and everything is behaving. Now in this video we would like to explain this not in detail, but we will give you a complete description that what they are and how they move and so on and so forth. And at the same time we would like to stress a very important fact about these valuation adjustment. Unfortunately, India is not a market for valuation adjustment. The reason is majority of the people are looking forward only forward contracts and max to max simple option contracts. But if you go to outside, which is your so-called Malaysia, Singapore, US, your Dubai, and other which acted as an offshore treasury centers, you would get to know that they are having a big appetite for these valuation adjustments. Why? Because valuation adjustments are bringing a lot of fun for them. Lot of fun means valuation adjustment is very much necessary, and they are having a much bigger portfolio than what Indian corporates generally have, to be very honest. Now I will explain one by one the valuation adjustment, but before explaining one by one valuation adjustment, I would like to stress one fact very clearly, that this valuation adjustment may or might not be utilized for everybody around. I meant to say that because if you don't have exotic foreign exchange portfolio, or if you are not a bank, because how the cost of regulatory capital will impact you if you are not a bank. And Indian banking system are yet to accept the Basel 3, and we know that once Basel 3 will get implementable, then in that also people will not understood what do you mean by KVA and what do you mean by MVA and all this. So let me explain this one by one, which is CVA, cost of valuation adjustment, sorry, credit valuation adjustment. Credit valuation adjustment is a very important, and this applies to forward contract also, CVA and DVA. What is CVA for you? It is a DVA for a bank. Or what is DVA for a bank? It is CVA for you. Now what is credit valuation? What is credit valuation adjustment? As you know very well, as the word suggests, credit valuation adjustment is probably the most widely known and best understood valuation adjustment we have. Credit valuation adjustment captures the discount to the standard derivative value that a buyer would offer given the risk of the counterparty default. In concept, it is sometimes akin to the credit provisions to the loan asset. They credit provision to the loan assets. Currently, the industry is revisiting the blanket use of CDS rates in CVA calculation. This is due to the reduced liquidity in the CDS contracts and so on. Now, this is little technical. Now, in theoretical. Now, in little example, I am JP Morgan and you are Genpact. I am a bank, you are an exporter. You wanted to sell $100 million, having deal date today, maturity date 1 year, and assuming rate agreed is 70. The composition is 68 plus 2 rupees of premium, total 70. Now JP Morgan, who is the bank, is taking a call on Genpact. Now it's not that Genpact can default, but there is a counterparty risk in the books of JP Morgan. Now Genpact may default, Genpact might not default. Genpact may default. Genpact may default because I would say Genpact may default because because IT industry is getting down. Genpact revenue might fall. Anything would happen. Sitting today, you cannot simply take anything into consideration. You have to go with 100 probabilities of that. Now, what would you do? You will take the CDS on that. And CDS stands for credit default swaps. Suppose you are taking a CDS in which JP Morgan is a CDS buyer and CDS seller, I don't know, anybody could be CDS seller, anybody could be, say, HSBC. JP Morgan will pay some fee, and that fee JP Morgan will take from Genpact, and that fee is CVA. So what JP Morgan will do, my friend, ideally your rate should be 70. Ideally, the CDS cost is 45 paisa. Okay, so what we do, you should get 69.55 as your rate. This is credit default swap. This is credit valuation adjustment. And that is a loss to an exporter. Now take a simple example. Suppose you are Reliance Industries Limited. You wanted to buy dollars. Now since you wanted to buy dollars, what you would do, you would do you would pay this 75 plus 45 paisa. So the cost would be 70.45 paisa. So this is CVA for exporter. This is CVA for importer. And CVA applies to everybody. CVA applies to a forward contract player. It applies to options, exotic derivatives and structured derivatives. Why I'm mentioning this? Because CVA in India applies to majority of the people. I would say majority means majority of the people. Here comes another valuation, which is debit valuation adjustment. Like I mentioned, a CVA for a company is a DVA for a bank. A DVA for a bank is a CVA for the company. Let me write here DVA, debit valuation adjustment. Now what is debit valuation adjustment? Debit valuation adjustment is rather a counter initiative. It involves recording a gain as the bank own credit risk deteriorated. Now debit valuation adjustment is normally computed in much the same way as the CVA, but this is often thought as the way on the other side of the CVA. Example, bank DVA is the counterparty CVA. Simple. So here it is the bank risk. What would happen if Genpact stay and JP Morgan defaults? This is DVA. So this is DVA. So Genpact, although companies are not considering DVA into consideration, but here Genpact will take, if they are managing their treasury in an effective way, they would have take the hedge of the JP Morgan in their books. What would happen if JP Morgan defaults? That after 1 year you will go to JP Morgan and JP Morgan will say, excuse me, I don't know you. Who are you? I don't know you. So that is. So DVA and CVA are very, very important, and this applies to, I will mention here, this applies to forwards and this applies to options. Now here comes FVA. Which is funding valuation adjustment. Now what do you mean by FVA, which is shortly known as funding valuation adjustment? Is, standard derivative valuation models which are generally used in the banking and a corporate treasury assume LIBOR as a benchmark. We all know that at British banking now there is another firm who is doing that. These models therefore assume the time value of money or the funding rate available to the bank. It is the benchmark rate. Funding value adjustment means the cost which the bank is having, the cost which the funding value adjustment, the cost the bank is having, the cost which bank is bearing because it is entering into a kind of forward contract. That is shortly known as funding valuation adjustment. And this is OTC market. So funding valuation adjustment will further divide it into two parts. Funding valuation adjustment would be funding benefit adjustment, FBA. Another is funding cost adjustment, FCA. We are not describing much here because once we are going to make a YouTube video, we are going to describe this using technical example. But in short, a funding benefit arises for a bank typically when the derivative has a negative market value or a liability which banks needs to take from the client. Consider the case where the bank acquires a derivative in a liability position. The bank will accept this liability in exchange for the cash. The cash received by the bank can be used to fund other ventures. right, in lieu of raising external funding. The value of the funding benefit can be seen as the rate. The value of the funding benefit can be seen as the rate at which the bank can raise cash, which is based upon its own credit quality. So henceforth, the funding benefit funding benefit adjustment otherwise has a significant overlap with the debit valuation adjustment. So I am entering into a lot of derivative contracts for which I need to raise the cash from the market, and need to raise cash from the market, I need to pay some cost, and that cost is FVA, which is shortly known as funding valuation adjustment. But overall funding valuation adjustment would be divided into two parts, which is funding benefit adjustment and funding cost adjustment. And this only applies to big banks like American banks, European banks and others. Forget that this applies to Indian bank. This do not applies to Indian bank. Another term is collateralized valuation adjustment, COLVA and OIS. OIS stands for overnight index swaps. Hope you remember that approximately 1 year ago, Federal Reserve Standard Board give a license to banks to discount their valuation adjustments using OIS but not the LIBOR, because of the huge speculation that has happened in the LIBOR, and we know that the LIBOR scandal is very high. We know that because of the LIBOR, because of the scandal, the valuation of the LIBOR moved to ICT from British Banking Association. COLVA is collateralized valuation adjustment. Now once you do the valuation, sometimes you will bring a collateral to a bank, and many cases it does happen via CSX. CSX stands for Credit Support Annex, shortly known as CSA also. Now a positive collateral margin against a derivative position significantly alters both credit risk and funding profile, because if you create a margin to the bank, then you will not be charged DVA, because if the CSA is applicable, then CVA will not be applicable, but DVA would surely be applicable. A perfectly collateralized derivative has no credit risk and therefore requires no CVA or DVA. In practice, though, these situations are rare due to operational practicalities in posting collaterals, so the credit risk is not completely eliminated. The collateral received against an in-the-money trade typically means that receiving banks pay interest on the overnight OIS, overnight index swap, and this is known as COLVA. COLVA captures the cost of acquiring collateral. Let me write here. COLVA refers to cost of acquiring collateral. So how collateral will work? You have a company, Microsoft, who wanted to hedge with Deutsche Bank, and they signed 4 documents: ISDA, RDS, Annexure and CSX. In this, they posted a collateral of $1 billion with Deutsche Bank, on which they are minting Euribor plus 100 basis point. Now that collateral will help the bank, and believe me, that is not a notional. Collateral is always mark to market. So this CSX we are talking about, this is not notional, this is mark to market, valuation of the mark to market. So if the valuation of the mark to market till the time the valuation of the mark to market, or M2M, reaching approximately $1 billion, Deutsche is saved. The time it crosses $1 billion, there is an issue for Deutsche, and from here the collateralization will, so from here the CVA will start. By the time it is still $1 billion, the credit valuation adjustment of Microsoft will do not matter. On the other hand, the debit valuation adjustment of Deutsche Bank would surely be matter. The last but not the least, we have one thing which is capital valuation adjustment, which is shortly known as KVA. We have last but not the least, which is known as capital valuation adjustment, which is shortly known as KVA. This is one form of valuation adjustment. Now, what is KVA? This is strictly restricting to Basel. This is strictly restricting to Basel 3. Now, what KVA is all about? You need to maintain a regulatory capital with you, and that regulatory capital needs to be pumped up over the period of the time, because and you need to continue to make sure that the regulatory capital should be equivalent, should be as per the risk weighted asset and the risk weighted liabilities of the bank, right? Like currently, you know that the Deutsche is in a big mess only because Deutsche is unable to maintain the regulatory capital, and there are a lot of talks which are happening that the COCOS, which is contingent capital of the Deutsche Bank, is also in a mess. But unfortunately, this time German government is not interested in saving Deutsche. Rather, there are a lot of talks which are happening in the market. They are inviting the sovereign wealth funds to come forward and save Deutsche. I'm not sure how exactly things would go or how the things it would be, but in any context, this is not good. In any context, this is not good. So what would happen? You have a cost of maintaining the capital as per the regulator, and this costs are going to be charged from exporters and importer. And this is sitting today, I think, this is my personal opinion, I'm not sure whether the banks are following this or not. I think CVA is not only very difficult but also easy. Difficult in the sense that not difficult in the sense that the majority of the globe is having negative interest rate policies, and sitting today approximately $13.5 trillion of total sovereign issues are having negative interest rate policy. So raising capital is not a big scene, as simple as that. But it might possible that for a bank raising capital, it is still a scene, because we need to consider the cost of credit also. Like in the case of the Deutsche, the Commerce Bank and the ING Vesha, this is again a scene. This is again a scene which should be taken into consideration. But at the same time, we need to appreciate the fact that if we do not keep appropriate capital into consideration and we continue to take the trades in the book and anything happen, then we are gone. We are not gone. I think we are simply gone. This is how things would go, and this is how capital value adjustment is a challenge for a bank, and it's also very important valuation adjustment which we need to consider. So in short, wrapping up this video, the following are the valuation adjustment, which is CVA, credit valuation adjustment, DVA, debit valuation adjustment, FVA, funding value adjustment, OIS or COLVA, cost of collateralized and overnight index swap, KVA, cost of regulatory capital, CVA we explained, it is the cost of hedging, which is the credit default swap. What is CVA? It is DVA for what is CVA for a corporate? It is DVA for a bank. Or what is DVA for a corporate? It is CVA for a bank. Then you have FVA, funding valuation adjustment, which is here. Funding valuation adjustment means to take a derivative contract or to take any kind of structured derivative into the book, you need the cash. And that cash banks can take from the market, but not easily. It is not that I wanted to take up a cash so I can take up right now. I should have the credibility in the market so that people can give me cash, and that credibility, the cost of this credibility is known as funding valuation adjustment. Funding valuation adjustment would further be divided into two parts. One is FBA, funding benefit adjustment. One is FCA, funding cost adjustment. Like you can see it here. Funding benefit adjustment and funding cost adjustment. Then you have COLVA, which is collateralized valuation adjustment, and which is linked with OIS. OIS refers to overnight index swap. Just in one shot, OIS means hedging of local currency asset or liability in local currency book